Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Hughes. I'm your moderator today. Hope everyone can hear me all right. I'll be your moderator for our webinar this afternoon called The Path to Crime Analysis. And was reviewing the list of registrants this morning, and there's almost 300 people who have registered. So that's great to be part of this crime analysis community, and thank you very much for spending some time with us. So I am Jeff Hughes. I'm the District Manager for Defense and Security here in the National Capital Region. I'll be your moderator. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We have Chris Delaney, who's the Technical Lead for Esri Law Enforcement. You may have seen him on other webcasts or doing presentations for industry associations or other Esri events. We also have Amy Belfer. She's the Strategic Services Manager for the Regina Police Service, and she's going to talk a little bit about careers as a crime analyst, and look forward to hearing some thoughts on that. And we also have Ian Williams, who's the Manager of Analytics and Innovation for the Toronto Police Service, and is also a valued member of the crime analysis community here in Canada. A couple of logistical things before we hand it over to the speakers. We are going to record this webinar today, so you can expect to get an email from us with a link to the recording over the next couple of days that you can look at, and folks who aren't able to be with us live will be able to follow up with. And we also ask that you please share your thoughts on the exit survey. That really helps us improve these webinars and improve the topics. Also today, as your moderator, part of my job is to handle questions, and we encourage you to ask questions at any point during the webinar today. We ask that when you go to the Q&A panel, you choose to ask all panelists, and that will make sure that that question gets routed properly. So we'll encourage you to do that, please. Finally, today's agenda, we're going to cover off a number of things. I'm actually going to start at the bottom. Later on in the hour, Ian is going to provide an overview of the Ryerson Certificate Program, which is one avenue for learning and training and education around crime analysis. We'll also hear from Amy on the manager's perspective of essential crime analyst skills. But first, I'm going to hand it off to Chris Delaney, and Chris is going to give us an introduction to the field of crime analysis and some of the technology. So I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thanks a lot, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending upon where you are. Thank you for joining us today. As Jeff mentioned, today's webinar is really all about understanding the profession of crime analysis. Crime analysis is the primary profession and process through which the use of GIS is performed to support law enforcement agencies. And so what we'd like to do today is walk you through a little bit, for those of you who are somewhat unfamiliar or new to the field of crime analysis but are interested from a GIS perspective, introduce you to the field of crime analysis and talk a little bit, as Jeff mentioned, about kind of some of the ways in which GIS is used in the field of crime analysis, get Amy's perspective on kind of the key essential skills that she as a manager is looking for out of crime analysts, and for those of you interested in a career in crime analysis, specifically as it relates to applying GIS and location analytics skills to support law enforcement, Ian is here to talk about the Ryerson Certificate Program. So very excited to share with you this today. But the place that I want to start is, at a high level, what is crime analysis? When we say crime analysis, we're really referring to not only a professional field of work. This is generally a civilian position, but occasionally is a sworn police position as well. But it also describes a process of performing analysis to support law enforcement needs, both internal operational needs and needs of interacting with stakeholders in law enforcement agencies, whether that's community, whether that's other public officials, or whether that's other stakeholders like the media. So crime analysis generally follows a process whereby analysts get and collect data for analysis. That could be quantitative or qualitative data from a variety of sources that I'll talk about in a minute. they organize that data and prepare it to be able to support analysis. One of those common tasks is generally around rendering address information to be able to put that data on a map to perform a variety of spatial and non-spatial analyses. Once that analysis has been done, we're creating information products that can be used to support decisions made to all of the different stakeholders that crime analysts serve in an agency. And using that information, using the feedback from those decision makers, that enables us to revise our processes over time. Crime analysis covers a wide array of different topical areas, looking at not only patterns of crime, offender patterns, looking at not just crime, but disorder, quality of life issues, traffic concerns, and optimization of the internal workings of police departments. And so in this way, crime analysts are really essential to support all functions of law enforcement, whether that is being able to effectively implement and execute crime reduction strategies in a community, to be able to optimize the use of patrol resources, or to help solve crimes with the assistance of investigators or prosecutors. To do this, we generally look at about 4 main categories of crime analysis. Those include tactical analysis, which generally involves the use of identifying crime patterns, whether that's short-term hotspots or crime sprees or serial crimes, to be able to target and impact those crimes to catch bad guys. It also involves the use of criminal intelligence analysis, looking at patterns of looking at patterns of offender networks of activity and linking and network activities to be able to understand and prioritize offenders for investigative lead generation and follow up on case support. And that may include things like looking at financial transactions or cell phone analysis, social media analysis, all of these kinds of things. Then there's sort of a long-term aspect to performing crime analysis, strategic analysis, understanding the trends and the long-term crime problems and hotspots that are impacting our communities over time. This is in contrast to tactical analysis that is very much focused on what's happening right now in terms of patterns and trends in a community. Strategic analysis is helping us understand in the long term what are the problems that we need to focus on holistically, that we need to maybe look at strategies beyond just patrol and investigative strategies to community collaborations to help come up with strategic approaches that involve stakeholders and assets and resources that are beyond just the police resources that are capable. And then lastly, a form of kind of administrative analysis, whether that's looking at how we optimize investigator workloads or optimizing response times through trying to allocate our districts and officer resources to districts in the most optimal forms. And to be able to evaluate the work that we in policing do to ensure that we're sticking to evidence-based best practices. So crime analysts can wear some of these hats, or they can be responsible for all of these different analytical functions. It really is going to depend upon the size of the department. Some small jurisdictions will have 1 or 2 crime analysts that will be responsible for all of these things. Larger agencies will have units full of crime analysts that are either centralized or decentralized in district offices, each responsible for a small part of this overall picture. But the one common factor across all of these different forms of analysis and the analysts who perform them is that location is a critical component of all of these forms of crime analysis. And that is because the data that ultimately analysts use to perform those analyses are all inherently location-based. Whether that's essential data sets that are generated by the police, like crime data, arrest data, calls for service data, traffic crashes and citations or warrants, or whether it's sensor-based data coming from GPS tracking systems for officer vehicles or CCTV or other kinds of sensors or monitoring devices. All of that data is data that has some kind of location component to it. And to understand it, we like to look at it visually to be able to understand and uncover new patterns and relationships that are only available to visualize and understand through mapping and spatial analysis. And ultimately, it's not just that location is essential to these forms of analysis because it's a key part of the data itself, but essentially any modern crime control strategy that a law enforcement agency is going to implement has location at the heart of it. Some of them are extremely well known, like the CompStat program, popularized by the New York City Police Department, that looks at maps of hotspots every single week to understand trends that are occurring. Or the DDAX model, the data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety, looking for common hotspots of crime and crash activity to be able to optimize police resources to support not only crime reduction, but also traffic calming activities as well. And even into kind of the more modern approaches to crime reduction strategies based around evidence-based notions of trying testing to see what kinds of strategies work and actually engaging in rigorous evidence-based research to evaluate and test those studies and to employ then in the future operational practices that are based on researched, demonstrated, empirically valid and tested strategies. And what we know about what works in policing from an evidence-based crime control perspective is that one of the central tenets that we know works in policing is hotspot policing, that targeting hotspots of crime is an effective mechanism to reducing crime and disorder. And so when it comes to the use of location, and particularly GIS, crime analysts are the ones who identify those hotspots using GIS, and that information is then used by patrol and investigative supervisors to be able to target those areas with appropriate resources to ultimately reduce crime. So, from a crime analysis perspective, ArcGIS really represents sort of an essential component of the crime analyst toolbox. And typically, that has been in the form of desktop GIS software. And analysts use that desktop GIS software and have historically done this to deliver hard copy maps that can be utilized by decision makers. But in a modern era where millennial officers are used to working with mobile devices and have access to internet resources to be able to ask questions and interrogate data of a spatial nature from the field, the hard copy mapping as a sole solution to being able to deliver spatial analytics and decision support is really not sufficient anymore. Unfortunately, Esri has been working on the ArcGIS platform for the last 7 years or so, enabling a new form of mapping in GIS that we call WebGIS. And the idea of WebGIS is that instead of just simply being able to make hard copy maps, we can now deliver mapping and analytical products in interactive forms for browser-based applications or dashboards or mobile devices. So in a modern law enforcement agency performing crime analysis, what the kind of new landscape looks like for a set of essential tools for crime analysts is really a combination of two things. Tools that support analysts to do their GIS work and spatial analysis the way that they need, and additionally, the ability to use ArcGIS Enterprise and WebGIS to create interactive information products for internal and external stakeholders, whether that is interactive briefings or mission-focused apps or dashboards for decision makers or for stakeholders, in addition to hard copy maps. So let's take a look now at what some of that content looks like in practice. So give me just a minute. I'm going to share my screen. And what you're seeing now is the modern version of the essential tool for crime analysts, and that is Esri's flagship desktop software, which is now ArcGIS Pro. ArcGIS Pro, if you're not familiar with it, is the successor desktop app to ArcMap, which has been a standard of crime analysts for about the last 20 years or so. ArcGIS Pro is the evolution of ArcMap. It's a 64-bit app. It uses the modern Windows ribbon interface. And to help crime analysts become more familiar with this new version of desktop GIS, we've also built in a brand new free add-in called the Crime Analysis Solution. And what we've tried to do with this solution is organize a set of out-of-the-box tools combined with new custom tools to place in one single spot all of the tools that analysts are going to most frequently use to support their work. So tools to get data on a map, to collate and organize your data, to make selections, to perform a variety of different kinds of hotspot analyses, to provide some tools to support investigations, and then ultimately to create both hard copy and interactive maps and layers. So just a few quick examples of the kinds of work that crime analysts use ArcGIS Pro for. Things like this map showing the percent change from a current 28-day period from a previous day period, and being able to visualize that in a blue to red graduated color map by precinct, showing in red areas where we've had increase and in blue areas where we've had decrease. Or being able to understand not just hotspots of crime using kernel density analysis, the most frequently used tool for identifying crime hotspots, but to also take it one step further. And in this example, understand change in density over time, red being areas that have gotten hotter compared to a previous period, and blue being areas that have gotten colder. Being able to identify in calls for service data those repeat problem locations where we have issues over and over and over again, so that from a resource allocation perspective, we can try to find strategic ways to intervene in these locations to reduce the burden of officers having to go back to those locations time and time again, thus taking them out of their availability to respond to calls for service and consuming their time. Simple kinds of visualizations, like being able to understand the spatial relationships and patterns between where motor vehicles are stolen and where they're in yellow and where they are recovered in green, so that in understanding the relationships between these two layers, we're able to potentially uncover new patterns that may help us better be able to solve this series of incidents, and to be able to do things like understand patterns of life of targets of investigations through evaluation and analysis of cell phone data, which is another capability that's included as part of the crime analysis solution for ArcGIS Pro. So this really represents the core set of tools that analysts are going to use for desktop purposes. But desktop GIS is not always the right fit for all crime analysts. For some, that might be a little bit too complex and heavy of a piece of software to use. And for those folks, in particular new analysts or maybe sworn analysts who are only temporarily going to be in a position before reassigned out to do other forms of police work, to kind of supplement desktop GIS, Esri's also launched a relatively new program called ArcGIS Insights. ArcGIS Insights is a web-based analytical tool that lets you perform spatial analysis in a browser and non-spatial analysis of your data. In this example, I'm looking at financial transactions as part of a money laundering analysis where we believe a number of suspects are involved in money laundering for narcotics activity. With Insights, I'm able to perform analysis in maps, in this case creating a link map showing the places where senders of transactions were in blue and recipients in yellow. I'm able to create social link analysis visualizations of data by time, and other attributes in my data. And using Insights and these different card-based approaches, any selection I make, in this case looking at this one particular individual, can adjust to all of my other cards, and I can start to discover new patterns in my data across these non-spatial and spatial cards. So in this way, this sort of drag and drop approach of being able to say, hey, I want to make a map, let me just simply select an attribute and drag it onto a card. And from there, I can start to do things as quick and easy as building out a heat map in just a matter of 3 or 4 short clicks. So ArcGIS Insights really represents kind of a complement to the core set of desktop GIS analytical skills. But in addition to that, we want to be able to take our analytical work and share it in forms that are more consumable for our users and for our stakeholders who are going to use crime analysis information to make decisions. An example of that is an interactive bulletin using ArcGIS Story Maps, where we can, instead of making a hard copy PDF bulletin of a crime pattern, we can put it into a story map where we can provide both map-based interactive kinds of capabilities, but also add in additional layers of data so that the experience for your users is fully interactive. And these story maps can also be printed as well as being able to be used on either a desktop or a mobile device. Here's another example of that, taking some of the tools from the crime analysis solution for a firearm crime analysis and being able to deliver that information, adding in, turning on and off layers, making it very easy to use for our users in the field, zooming in to certain hotspot areas, activating various data to tell a story with our maps that's not really easily available to do if you were just simply delivering hard copy maps. In addition to those kinds of interactive briefing capabilities, the ability to consume real-time data. In this example, looking at a live calls for service feed of calls as they're coming in, but then also being able to take that information and contextualize it with camera information. So hold on just a second, I gotta refresh my browser. Being able to take that calls for service data as those calls are coming in real time, I can click on one of these. It'll zoom to my location. It'll show me all of my currently active camera feeds in and around that location. And if I wanted to, I can even trigger additional searches that will allow me to understand problem individuals who are in and around this area. Things like people who have recently been stopped in that area, or parolees that live in this area, or recent crime activity that occurred in here, and be able to share that information in the form of a simple report that could be exported out and delivered to a responding officer or an investigator who's going to be working a scene of an incident. In addition to those kind of capabilities, one of the more popular capabilities of the ArcGIS platform for crime analysis is to be able to deliver dashboards, both mapping dashboards, and in this excellent example from the Vancouver Police Department, crime statistics dashboards, where in this case, citizens are able to come in, filter by their neighborhood, filter by date, and see all crime statistics relevant to that particular location. Or to go one step further and share out complete public safety data portals, as the Toronto Police Service has done, enabling people to have access to publicly accessible data feeds, data dashboards, and public mapping applications of all of their crime. So this is just a very quick example of some of the capabilities that are available to crime analysts to deliver their work in meaningful ways beyond just hard copy maps. I'm going to switch back over to the PowerPoint, and hopefully that gave you a sense of some of the kind of the GIS capabilities that crime analysts are using GIS for to support their work. But what I wanted to do now is bring in Amy Belfer, who is the Strategic Services Manager at the Regina Police Service, to get some of her perspectives on kind of the key sets of skills that she expects her analysts to have and that she's looking for prospective individuals who are considering a career in crime analysis. Welcome, Amy, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
So Amy, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit briefly about the unit that you manage and the kinds of work that they are doing to support the Regina Police Service.
You bet. So the Regina Police Service Strategic Services section houses all crime types of analysis. So that includes our tactical, strategic, operations, and intelligence analysts. The unit itself is made up of 8, soon to be 9 individuals, all civilian, who have an extremely diverse background ranging from a doctorate in psychology to a master's degree in computer science to a bachelor's degree in sociology. In our unit, in addition to that, the diversity of their education is even more pronounced with their background of work, which makes them an incredibly effective team. So we have, here in Regina, we have 3 crime analysts that all have separate portfolios but are cross-trained, which means that they can cover for each other, complete each other's work. They certainly do not work in silos. In fact, they work side by side in one office. And we have here in Regina quite a problem with property crime, and we tend to have the highest crime rate in the country. And so we have one analyst that is assigned to work with major crimes, our gang unit and our drug unit. We have another analyst, a tactical analyst, who works directly with patrol and our command staff, not in the sense of their performance or their workload, but rather all of those crimes that are reported in a 24-hour period, focusing on trends, hotspots, known offenders, repeat victims, and different geographical trends. And we have a third analyst who focuses on property crimes. So here in Regina, we call that street crimes, but that includes break-and-enters, robbery, SHOCAP, which is our serious and violent offenders, focusing as well on some of our domestic conflict issues. In addition to that, we have an operations analyst that we implemented about a year ago now, focusing on what we call the patrol workload assessment. So his job is to report semi-annually on how patrol is doing, how many calls for service they go to, how long it takes them to get there, where those calls are occurring, which districts in the city have higher calls for service by type, day of week, so on and so forth. In addition to that, he helps with assessing whether our shifting pattern is consistent with our calls for service. And just recently this morning, for example, we talked about whether our K-9 members are working appropriate shifts to the need in the community. We also have a strategic analyst whose role it is to look at sort of our long-term trends. So that includes 6 months to a year, to sometimes up to 10-year trends in terms of how are our crime prevention measures impacting or not impacting crime in our city, which best practices are out there that we could be implementing, what kinds of things can we learn from a national level, and so on and so forth. This unit is a little bit unique in the sense that we also have 2 other specialty positions outside of the realm of crime analysis, but certainly help us. One is our policy analyst who focuses on our policy manual, and the other is a business analyst. And she is our expert in all things data, and she allows us to incorporate our different data systems into something that we can understand and visualize and makes it easy to present to frontline members, leaders in our organization, board members, and the media.
That's it? That's a
It's a little bit.
that is an amazingly wide array of responsibilities that you are stewarding for your organization, Amy. How do you identify for all of these different missions that you in strategic services and your analysts are supporting? How are you identifying candidates that are going to be able to have the right combination of skills to support all of those different analytical missions?
Well, I wish there was an easy answer to that. There isn't, but there are some things that really stand out for analysts. The very first thing during an interview or the first time I meet somebody who wants to be a crime analyst is how they communicate. And I think if you asked me this question 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been on the top of my list. But we can train people to write a beautiful essay. We can send them to postgraduate degrees, master's degrees, graduate programs to learn theory. But it takes a very special skill set to be able to communicate some very high level and sometimes very detailed analysis in a very simple way. The most effective analysts that I've seen, that I've worked with, can sort of describe to you how they came up with the results they did in an elevator conversation and defend it just as quickly. And that's not to say that they're defensive, but that they are incredibly informed. Writing skills are really important. Executives don't have time to read a thesis. They certainly don't have time to read a beautiful essay. They have about 5 to 10 minutes of their time that they can give to any given issue. So we here have changed the way we communicate. We not only visualize our data, which is what ArcGIS has really helped us to do, but we also write briefing memos as opposed to very long documents. And the other is presentation. Sometimes people don't read what we write. Amazing. I know that's shocking, but they don't. And so we have to be able to give a very quick presentation where we can explain something very complex or something very urgent to a frontline investigator who's undercover, to an executive, and to a board member. I would say for me, that is something I look for in every interview I give, first and foremost. And then the second would be certainly their technical skills. I've had people interview that have exceptional skills in ArcGIS, exceptional writing skills, but they can only do one thing at a time. So not only are their technical skills with those software programs important, but their ability to multitask and be very detail-oriented for sure make a good analyst.
Amy, in terms of kind of, so what's next? What are the sort of technical skills that you are looking for to, advance your unit? There's a lot of discussion around the role of machine learning and data science and a number of other technical frontiers that are touching crime analysis. Are there areas in particular from a technical perspective that you are looking to kind of grow capabilities for the personnel that you supervise?
Yes, I would say there are 4 specifically. The first is certainly their knowledge of not any specific mapping tool. Certainly our preference is ArcGIS, but as long as they understand the purpose behind mapping. I've had people that I've interviewed who can certainly tell you what a dot on a map is and how they got it, but they don't know why they did it. They don't understand why mapping is important, why location is so critical in policing. Technically, our preference is not only can you put some dots on a map, but you can translate that information into something that we can action. So dashboards, creating presentations or very quick visual graphics, certainly with hotspots or trends, that's very helpful. If somebody comes to an interview and they don't have good Excel skills, Microsoft Excel, I find that is a very big hurdle for them. It sounds simple. It sounds a little bit second nature, but it is critical. Everything that we do in mapping, location-based, I can import using an Excel spreadsheet. So the ability to not only input the data into an Excel spreadsheet, but also to manipulate it, to show it in different ways, to combine data sets, and also to be able to audit them so that we have good information. When we talk about artificial intelligence and when we talk about big data, big learning, one of the hiccups for people is they don't know where to start. So they have all of this information and all of this data, and they don't know what to do with it. Their ability to understand where the data comes from, their ability to understand how to use that data to show trends, to show what I call temporal reporting, day of the week, week of the day, is really critical. That's usually augmented with some basic stats training. It's funny, I took lots of stats. I don't remember them all, but I can certainly fudge my way through them. Had I not been able to do that, this would be very difficult. We don't necessarily come to work every day and have a prescription about what we're going to do. It's never the same. So our ability to integrate our knowledge of data, our visualization of data, and certainly the analysis behind it is really critical.
Well, Amy, I want to thank you very much for sharing your insight today. I mean, I think just this brief conversation really illustrates kind of one of the key points that we wanted to articulate in this webinar, and that is the diverse set of skills that it takes for a candidate to be an effective professional in the crime analysis field. As you alluded to, it's not just simply about technical skills in GIS and other forms of analytical software, and it's also data fluency. It's how you're able to take your work and turn it into something that can be operationalized succinctly and communicated effectively to non-technical personnel. It is fluency in not only the context from a criminal environment perspective, but also from a policy and procedural perspective across a policing organization, and then how that policing organization touches on policies and issues that are affecting and impacting the greater community. So I just want to say thanks again, Amy, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And on that note, the next speaker that I'd like to introduce is Ian Williams from the Toronto Police Service. And as you just heard from our conversation with Amy, finding good candidates to be effective crime analysts really requires a wider range of skill sets that can be challenging to acquire through traditional academic programs. And to that end, Ian has been working with Ryerson University on a certificate program to enable people who are interested in the field of crime analysis to really acquire this wide range of skills that are necessary to be effective in this field. So welcome, Ian, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I'm going to provide today a bit of an overview of the certificate program that's been developed at Ryerson, and I think it's important, some background that led us to here has been not only for the Toronto Police Service, but a lot of police agencies across Canada and beyond have been leveraging Ryerson skill sets from a variety of programs, mainly the geography, GIS programs, to provide the resources and people that have driven crime analysis for quite some time now. And it was because of that, I think, that Ryerson recognized there was a need to create a specialization that would fulfill, I think, a lot of organizational needs going into the future. And for us, there was a number of benefits which essentially drive why the certificate was created. And as Amy and Chris have both mentioned as well, there's a demand for these multidisciplinary skills. So recognizing that the technical skills are important and essentially foundations of day-to-day work, but beyond that, there's a need for members of our organizations doing crime analysis roles to problem solve and to have really important critical thinking skills. We also recognize the need for a standardized program, so an accreditation that fulfills this multidisciplinary background. For the Toronto Police Service, of course, it's convenient. Ryerson is located literally just down the street, and I'll get into some of how that courses are going to be offered going forward. But broader than this, Ryerson is also really well known for having programs that are designed to be practical. So identifying an industry, being able to create the credential to support that industry, and then building talent pipelines to support that industry, not only today, but going forward. And those talent streams, I think, are critical because at this point in time, not only Toronto, but a lot of other cities globally are fighting for talent. And we find ourselves competing with large tech companies, with large financial institutions, the big banks, and insurance companies. We also see there's a big demand from a number of other industries like consulting services. And we're interested in the same people because those multidisciplinary skills with a data fluency and capability to visualize and help decision makers in the organization choose which option is the best and to be able to produce a product to support any of those options is critical. And being able to present in non-technical terms, as we've heard, are skills that going forward are absolutely required. And so this certificate at Ryerson is designed to try to build into one program a combination of those abilities for candidates. The program is also considering how to be very accessible. So it doesn't actually require an undergraduate or graduate level education. So it's accessible from a perspective where, irrespective of the industry or interest that you have or educational background, you can access this program. Of course, there's prerequisites as you progress through it, but the entry-level courses, which are largely criminology focused and foundational GIS concepts, are included to be those foundational building blocks of a crime analysis member of an organization. Having a credential, of course, around this is really important for people who are either pursuing those crime analyst positions or who might already be in those positions and then looking forward to broadening skills and also pursuing next steps in a career. And I think in addition to that, it's considered to be largely, it's in the continuing education school at Ryerson, the Chang School, so it is viewed largely as perpetuating education that you already have, but may in fact be a career transition opportunity, not only for people who are already in public safety or law enforcement roles, but those who might be looking to enter those. And this is designed to be able to provide a background that will support that. The knowledge and skill development, which I think is really important, the slide shows both the required courses and the electives and gives you an idea of the way that you can combine these skill sets from a multidisciplinary perspective, taking that introduction to Canadian criminal justice from a criminology perspective, looking at policing in Canada as some electives around that, and also progressing through from foundational to relatively advanced spatial analytical methods, spatial database systems, understanding even how spatial databases work are really important, obviously, for this industry. But we've also included some psychology opportunities. So the program itself actually is supported through a number of different faculty at Ryerson, the Geography and Environmental Studies faculty, the Criminology faculty, and the Psychology faculty. And I expect that a lot of people are going to be interested in the combination of psychology and law, the psychology of criminal behavior, and combining those critical thinking skills and understanding of broader social concepts with the practical tool sets that you would receive from spatial methods in crime analysis, for example. And finally, the program finishes with a crime analysis project, which is intended to offer a student access to deliver a project for a police service. So there's going to be an offering from both the program to police services and from police services to the program to be able to give problems that these students can solve and make an introduction of those students to the respective organizations as well. It's not a practicum per se, but it's designed to be a practical project. So at the end of the day, there's a client and there's a deliverable, which should be something that the organization needs. I know from my perspective, I tend to have a list of nice to have projects or things that I just didn't quite get time to complete, or I only finished a part of it and I need to do this next part. That could be research, that could be methodology focused, that could actually be an analysis. And here's some data, perhaps free from personal identifiers or sensitive information, but here's some of the coordinates and the nature of these spatial incidents. And there's an analysis that ought to be performed to provide some insights to the organization. There's opportunities for those as well. And both the spatial methods in crime analysis, the 910 course, and the 911 course are going to provide students with that background in strategic, tactical, and administrative, and to some sense, criminal intelligence. But I would say it's more focused towards the strategic, tactical, and administrative, and helping to turn those students into problem solvers in the context of public safety. So there's quite a lot within that. And so looking forward, students would expect this to prepare them for, as I mentioned, critical thinking across those really important policy and issues areas that are impacting public safety, law enforcement organizations today, across criminology, psychology, and using those technical skills. So as we would know from people practicing in the industry right now, or even what you'd be aware of from those major issues facing police services, there's substantial challenges around how police services are working with the mental health community to be able to provide support in areas where a lot of demand through calls for service or through emergency management is coming through as a response to mental health challenges. So persons in crisis where police are the 24/7 response mechanism. And a lot of those discussions fall into really interesting policy areas that would be covered through some of this program. And of course, fundamentally, and the reason that we're here with Esri and with Amy today is because spatial analysis plays such a fundamental role in supporting those decisions and those policy areas. And so the students coming through this program will have fundamental GIS, spatial database, and not only introductory, but moving right through to advanced analysis methods, looking at those key areas of spatial analytics, pattern analysis, local statistics that can be applied across those core areas of crime analysis within public sector agencies. From a logistics perspective, there are both online and in-class offerings. There's a few classes that are only offered in class at this point. The crime analysis courses and the criminology course are only offered in class currently. I'd expect that in a relatively short period of time, those will become online offerings. I think Ryerson will expect to transition those and make them even more accessible than they are today. And there's opportunities as well for those who have educational experience that's related currently, so from a psychology or criminology or geography background, you can transfer credits at, I think, up to 50% of the course requirements for the certificate. So it gives you the opportunity to say, I've done studies that are already quite similar to this. You can transfer those credits and receive that acknowledgement from the certificate up to half of the actual courses that you would otherwise be required to take. We've included the link to the certificate here, and you can also search it online and find it from Ryerson Crime Analytics, or Crime Analytics Ryerson would make the full details of the program quite accessible. And I think with that, perhaps we can end off and with my section anyway, and maybe take some questions. Chris?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. I think this is it's really exciting to see the work that you're doing with Ryerson. Crime analysis as a profession continues to grow very dramatically, and the need for effective academic programs to serve as a pipeline to better serve the crime analysis professional community is really desperately needed, and so I think the work that you're doing really reflects that. So I hope that you've, for everyone attending the webinar today, I hope you found today's conversation helpful, either as a current or a prospective crime analyst, or as a GIS professional supporting law enforcement agencies, trying to understand how crime analysis, you can support crime analysis. So we provided a little bit of background on the field of crime analysis. You heard from Amy Belfer, who talked a little bit about some of the crime analysis skills that she perceives are kind of key to the work that she does. And from Ian just a moment ago, you heard a little bit about the work that he's doing with Ryerson on the crime analysis certificate program. We've got a few minutes left for questions. So at this point, I want to kick it back to Jeff. Are you still there?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some great questions come in. I will kind of address them one to each of the panelists, but certainly if others want to jump in, that would be great. Maybe this over time, and I think it was time well spent. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd also like to thank the panelists for their work and presenting this material to us. It's great. As I mentioned, the recording will be sent to those people who have registered. It will also be available at our website. The URL is on the screen. We also have the contact information for our panelists today, and again, I'd like to thank them once again for contributing, and not only to this webinar, but to our community of crime analysis. And with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you very much, and have a great day.